Okay, so thank you. I wanted to actually start with a point that you mentioned in yours about this sort of misconceptions of communities, and begin really with a personal story of when I was at college, just about 2 or 3 years ago, as an 18-year-old. And one of my best friends was a Jewish girl, Tali Shlomo, and she was someone that I could really relate to on a personal level. We didn't really talk about religion at all, but there was certainly sort of commonalities that probably came across because of the religions that we believed in. And she was just someone, she taught me how to make hummus, and we'd go out to the park and we just do, just really nice things. But one day, someone that was from the Islamic Society came up to me and said, well, you seem to be like really good, practicing Muslim type thing. The only thing is you've got this friend that really you shouldn't have because she's Jewish. and this was sort of in stark contrast with everything that I seemed to know about Islam through my understanding of it in the practicality that I saw around me, through my parents' perception and living of Islam. My mother was the one that would sort of distribute food to the neighbours when she first came to this country, because she couldn't speak the language very well, but what her custom from Pakistan taught her was one of hospitality. That was what she saw of Islam. To the extent that there was this white elderly neighbour that we had on our road who was clearly not very happy that this sort of Asian family had moved in when we were quite young. And he didn't, we'd sort of go past his house as kids sort of playing, and he'd huff and puff and sort of look at us in funny ways. But my mum every year would continue to send him a gift at Christmas. And she sort of says years later, when we got married and we'd moved away, she sent this gift at Christmas, and she didn't realise that this elderly gentleman had actually fallen ill. And because of that, he was in tears. And he turns around and says to her, I haven't seen or spoken to anyone for months. But because you had this idea of giving me a gift, you were the first one. And then it was just really interesting that habit of what she understood of her religion to say had actually really broken down perceptions and stereotypes of the other. So I wanted to sort of start there. And it's interesting because actually when you look at the Qur'an, even though there are verses that clearly have been taken out of context and are used to justify difference and pushing people aside, if you put them in context and understand them, there's revelation after revelation which shows that Islam is encouraging people to get on regardless of what their background is or where they are from. So we have concepts in Islam like, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was sent as a mercy to humanity. It wasn't just for Muslims, but was for humanity. You have this idea that when different prophets came and spoke to people, they addressed them as Ya Qawmi, my people. They weren't separated or pushed aside or, seen as different. You have this idea constantly in the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that you are all Adam's offspring. And Adam was made from clay. So you all come from the same root, the same source. The idea of giving and looking after people comes from the sort of tradition of, the Prophet, peace be upon him, saying, feed them with the food that you eat, clothe them with the clothing as you wear, and do not cause trouble to God's creatures. Another famous saying of the Prophet, peace be upon him, O son of Adam, I fell ill and you visited me not. The response will be that, oh Lord, how could I... so this is God saying to the Prophet and to the followers of the Prophet, O son of Adam, I fell ill and you visited me not. The response will be, oh Lord, how could I visit you when you are the Lord of the worlds? And God will say, did you not know that so-and-so had fallen ill and you did not visit them? Had you visited them, you would have found me with them. So this idea of actually looking after people, taking care of people, regardless of their background, their colour, their culture, their creed, is sort of, firmly, I think, imbibed within the tradition of Islam. But I don't think that that's sufficient for us to just sort of take as sort of an endorsement of being friends with or being allies with, or, we can be in the same room together. I think if we look back into history and understand Islam better, there has to be something more that we get from these numerous accounts that we have throughout history. And I'm going to focus primarily on the life of the Prophet, peace be upon him, himself, of why so early on we have these relationships of people of different faith background that play such a crucial role in the Prophet, peace be upon him's life before Islam, before he gets the revelation, as well as afterwards. And why was that there? So if we start with sort of pre-revelation, so as we know, the Prophet receives a sort of message after the age of 40. But prior to that, he's in an environment surrounded by people who aren't Muslim. And he, his family essentially are not Muslim, but also he still tends to navigate amongst people that are good people of good spirit, people with ethics and people with a sense of justice. And one of the stories I think that relates this quite well is a story about Hilf al-Fudul. I don't know if you've heard of that. But basically there's an incident which occurs where in the marketplace, a person, we know of the Arab society, that was a very tribal society. And if you weren't linked with a tribe, there was only a limited amount of protection that you had. And so a man from outside had actually come in to trade. And one of the people in the marketplace knew that he was outside, and therefore he didn't have the sort of tribal connections that would normally protect him. And so he took advantage of this and took more of his goods than he was willing to give money for. So he starts to look around and ask people for help, and everyone's ignoring him because he's not part of a tribe. And then suddenly 2 or 3 people seek him out and recognize that an injustice has been done. And they decide to make a pact together that actually, if there are people that come in and are being treated unjustly, then we will stand up for justice. This is the Hilf al-Fudul, the plaque that sort of stands up for that idea of justice and guidance. And the Prophet, even at the age of 20, joins in with this pact because he feels there's something of integrity and justice that he buys into, that he feels. And even after Islam, he looks back at this as a sense of guidance and direction of what Islam is truly meant to be about. Then throughout his journey, from very early on, so when the revelation comes, and the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, as we know, comes down from the mountain, shaking, confused, unsure about who he is. When his wife comforts him, the person she first goes to for reassurance is Waraka, a Christian monk. Now, why is it that we are given such an example so early on when the revelation of Islam has only just come? Why is it that suddenly a non-Muslim is needed as a means of support and guidance and help? If we continue, we find throughout, we talked about pre-Islam, the idea initially he was, brought up by his grandfather, but then sort of taken under the wing of his uncle, Abu Talib. Abu Talib was a polytheist. He always respected Muhammad, peace be upon him, before and after the revelation was received. But he never accepts Islam. He never, says that he is a Muslim. And there's various reasons and what have you, and people sort of debate about what happened and to what extent he sort of accepted. But what's interesting is that without Abu Talib, the Prophet, peace be upon him, and Islam, I don't think would ever really have had a chance to flourish and prosper the way it did. Because it was the protection of Abu Talib which allowed him the space to be able to live and be who he felt he needed to be able to practice his faith, to be able to have the freedom of religion. He had to have a space that allowed him to be able to talk about it and live it. And Abu Talib was the one that provided him with that, despite the fact that it created more enmity for him. There were people that were ready to attack him for it. When the Prophet, peace be upon him, escapes Mecca, we're often not told about this, but the expedition has to be one of secrecy because his life is at risk. He could be, killed in the process. So there's only 2 or 3 people that are actually told about his mission, when he's going to leave, where he's going to go, who's going to take him. But one of those people is a man called Abdullah ibn Uraykid, and he's a polytheist. So this is a time where no one else knows what's happening. There's only about 2 or 3 people. One is his daughter, the daughter of his best friend, Abu Bakr, and another one is a polytheist. And without his help, the Prophet would not have been able to escape. He is the one that takes him to the cave, organizes his transport to be able to get away from it. So I mean, there's a number of examples that I want to. Another one, actually, I actually think I should mention is, when the Prophet is escaping Taif, where he's been persecuted, and children have run him out of the city, throwing stones at him, and he's desperately looking for some sort of refuge. Again, it's a polytheist that gives him the shelter and security that he needs. So there's, throughout the history, with sort of, numerous examples of how people that aren't Muslim, the Christian king of Abyssinia who looks after the Muslims. Is it enough for us to just look at those things as examples for us to be good to people around? Or is there a deeper underlying message that we're meant to learn from this? And for us to sort of think about that, I just wanted to give you another practical understanding of where I'm at with this. And so I do a lot of work around sort of interfaith work. And for many years, it's been on the lines of sort of Christian-Muslim work. And the first time we started this was probably about sort of 18 years ago, when my first was very little. She was about a year or two a year old, and we sat in a Christian group, the first time that these Christian women and Muslim women had sat together. And one of the ways that the Christian woman who had sort of conducted the whole event, sort of introduced everything, was to sort of say to us, let's see what we want to know about, or no, let's see what we respect about one another. And she went around the room asking individuals, what do you appreciate and respect about the person of the other faith? And the Christians very easily, despite all the negativity and all the awful things that you hear about Islam and Muslims around the world, the Muslims very easily reeled off, the Christians very easily reeled off the fact that they really like the fact that, Muslims are very good at, looking after their families. Or, I don't know, they sort of listed, somehow they managed to find a list of different things that they really appreciated about Muslims and Islam. As Muslims, ashamedly, we struggled. I mean, we did think of things, but we had this sort of notion, I think, of, well, actually, do I really have something to give here? Because I have everything. I have Islam, and I have my understanding of faith that actually is enough. Am I really here for me, or am I here for you? It really made me question and think, actually, what is the purpose of what we're doing here? Is it just because we feel that we're helping someone else? Or is it really because we feel that we have something to gain from it? So I wanted to end with the verse in the highly quoted verse in Surah Al-Hujurat in the Qur'an, where God says that we have made you into nations and tribes so that you get to know one another, not that you despise one another. But it is, what do we mean by know? Is it just about the idea of meeting and saying, yeah, I have lots of friends that are from different faiths? Or is it deeper than that? Is it something about really knowing and understanding and perhaps learning from one another that we have missed from the words and the guidance of God and the Prophet? Muhammad, peace be upon him.